My name is Carmen, and I will be talking to you today about mental health and substance use in adoptees. And I used AdHealth as my data set for secondary data analysis. Briefly going to go over the problem statement, some literature review around adoption and parental support and substance use, research questions that I had for this, my method, my results, some clinical relevance and limitations. As I began my work in the foster and adoptive population in the state of Florida, I became very curious about ways to increase my efficacy and my competence in working with this diverse population. It seemed lacking in the program that I had received my master's in because there was still this perception that adoptive families are as if birth families. So there was very little distinction on how to address complex trauma and dilemmas within that family system. And then as I moved into my practicas and internships, I realized very quickly that there is a difference in working with an adoptive family versus an intact first biological family. And so as I moved into the research, I saw that there was very little in our MFT area regarding adoption and working with adoptive families. And I had to leave our area and move into social work and found more information there. And that was curious to me as marriage and family therapists, that we have very little focus on adoptive families, and that for some there was this lumping in with traditional or biological families. And these families are asking for help. So they are advocating for competent therapists for us to show up and recognize that they have complex trauma and different dilemmas, different challenges that are in need of awareness and assistance. So when we're looking at adoption, adoption is the lifelong process. It is defined as a personal act, also a legal act, and a social service act. That lifelong process is the adoption triad between the birth family, the adoptive family, and of course the adoptee. And those processes work through, in the societal aspect of finding these children, preparing families, providing post and adoptive services to facilitate that family union. The parental relationship quality, I was interested in looking at this particularly because of the research coming out with risk and resilience from Luther and colleagues, and how they're finding parental relationships and parental support as being a protective factor, not only in first families and traditional families, but also in adoptive families. And there's still that gap in how is that being used to translate in how we work with these families. Substance use, again, looking at the research around the rates and increase of substance use, especially for this population, for the adoptive population. In the AdHealth data set that I used, it focused on grades 7 through 12, and of those 12th graders, there were greater reports of alcohol, marijuana, and smoking regularly, with 63% reporting alcohol use in the 12th grade in the past year, 32% reporting marijuana use at in the 12th grade in the past year, and for smoking regularly, there was about 10% reported in the past month. So my questions, this national longitudinal study of adolescent and adult health is a data set that was collected 4 waves out of North Carolina from Chapel Hill. And I focused on wave 3, but this, the research from this, while looking at a point in time, was collected longitudinally. I was interested in depression and anxiety, and I was also interested in substance use and the parental relationships. However, in exploring this, I recognized that once again, we have a situation where adoptive families and adoptees are underrepresented in in studies and yet overly represented within other areas of dynamics. So a lot of the things that I was initially interested in looking at, I found very little significance in. So my participants, as you can see in this data sample, I only found 140 adopted individuals to my 4,739 non-adopted. This was very hard in trying to run statistical analyses and statistical models. So the wave 3 respondents were 18 to 26, and this data was collected during 2001 and 2002. And that is interesting because it is after a lot of changes in the adoption legislation. I conducted different exploratory analyses, independent sample t-tests, linear regressions. I standardized relationship quality with z-scores. I also ended up looking at some moderation effects using logistic regression models. So here's what I found. Yeah. Is there a significant difference in the reported rates of depression? So at this time, due to my sample size, I was not able to find significant associations. However, there is literature that correlates and where significance was found. And again, my models were there just wasn't enough. The significant difference in the reports of substance abuse, there was no significance. However, I wanted to include the smokes regularly because I found statistical significance after I removed my controls for gender and education. And if you remove those and you look, then it would seem that, adopted children would smoke 63% more likely to smoke than non-adopted. However, when you do control for gender and education, then that significance disappears. However, for some studies, if you look into the literature that did not control for that, having those rates being reported, I became curious about that. And for the parental relationship predicting substance use, did find statistical significance in the alcohol use in the past 6 years and marijuana use in the past year. So this was this was alcohol use with the father. And I did this one, it was not significant. Where's the thing? I don't know where it is. It was not significant. However, I wasn't initially looking at relationship with father, and I became curious of this dynamic that did occur because in the risk and resiliency with Luther, parental relationships, especially those with the other parent, were found to be as protective factors. However, here you can see that for the adopted, if you have a high relationship with your quality of relationship with your father, then you are less likely to drink alcohol. And however, with the not adopted, if you have a high relationship, which is this one right here, this higher relationship, you're actually more likely to drink. So I was thinking about dynamics and what that is. And of course, with quantitative data, you just get the numbers. You don't really know what is going on to create that effect. This relationship with the mother, however, was statistically significant. And you can see that for not adopted to adopted, there was very little change in your alcohol use, your likelihood to use alcohol. However, the non-adopted that had a high quality relationship with their mother were less likely to use alcohol. And the adopted that have a quality relationship with their mother were more likely to use alcohol. And then here, this looked at the relationship quality of the moderation of the relationship quality on marijuana use. Again, I ran through cocaine use, alcohol use, depression, anxiety, all found no significance due to my model. However, this one did come up as significant as the relationship moderating your effects, your probabilities of marijuana use. And again, seeing the reverse of the not adoptive that have a high quality relationship with their mother are more likely to use marijuana versus their adoptive counterparts that have a high relationship with their mother being less likely to use marijuana during that time. So the clinical relevance here, I was thinking in terms of protective factors and how working from a place of prevention as well. Is prevention more so on preventing the mental illness and substance use, or can we pull prevention back towards protection of families and intact families? And maybe early intervention looks at keeping families intact when able and finding ways to better support them during that time. And then again, anything that might contribute to guiding principles and treatment and moving towards adjusting our treatment. My limitations, there's a second one. So again, the data set that I selected was not very representative for my adoptive population, and I did not control for ethnicity or income in that. And I think that I might have also found maybe some difference in that when it comes to socioeconomic status. Questions? Sorry.